5 centuries before the birth of Jesus, this poem was written about the promise God had made to the people who were spread across the Middle East that they would get back to the life they were longing for, and that the new normal would be full of joy. Indeed, the Hebrew that is translated, "I will greatly rejoice in the Lord," is literally joy, joy. A kind of wonderful repetition that reminds me of a dog's tail when you get home. Joy, 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 joy. There is a ton of joy in this poem. It's a conversation between a human agent appointed by God and God, talking about what's coming for the people of God. The relationship between God and the people of God is so intimate that they make plans, they chat, they have a dialogue. The plans are so important to God that God has someone on site, a human being, who's there to make sure that God's justice gets done, that the recompense God intends for God's people gets delivered. That's joy, joy. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get the new normal sorted out. God's agent has been anointed and sent by God. We hear those words and we know that the agent is like David, the shepherd boy, the youngest in the family, who was anointed and sent to be the first king of Israel. David was a massive newness in Israel. So this human agent is going to affect a deep social newness. Pardon me. That is going to start where it is most needed, bringing good news to the oppressed, binding up the brokenhearted, proclaiming liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. And maybe we hear that list a little differently this year because of all the COVID-19 restrictions. We're already feeling a little oppressed, brokenhearted, captive, and imprisoned. And we know that the worst is still yet to come, that we have to get through the dangerous challenges of this winter. The deep social newness is going to start where it is most needed. But look at who is going to break that newness into being. The oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captive, and the imprisoned. The ones who were the most damaged by the old normal are the ones who are going to have the most to say, who are going to build the new normal for the community. That's God's plan. That's joy, joy. There's a phrase in the project plan for the human agent that we may not hear quite the same way as those who returned from exiles heard it. God's agent on the ground is going to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. That's another way of saying a sacred year of Jubilee. In the biblical Jubilee years, debts were written off, slaves were freed. Every 50 years, the people of God were supposed to rebalance society, get people out of the pigeonholes they had been jammed into by debt. Literally, the wealthy folks who held the debt were just supposed to write it off, rip it up. The land was returned to the original owners. There was a great reshuffling so that the gap between the rich and the poor was reset. Now, human nature has not changed that much in 3,000 years. How well do you think that Jubilee reshuffling went? Indeed, it went exactly as you think it would, meaning it rarely happened, and when it happened, it wasn't as thoroughly executed as the guidelines in Leviticus 25 laid out. But that was the plan. That debt would no longer imprison people, blind people, bind people to a life that was leading them away from the people that God intended them to be. So if the human agent in today's reading was anointed and sent to do something massively new, what could be more massively new than a true Jubilee year, when financial obligations were no longer driving more and more people deeper and deeper into oppression, broken hearts, captivity, and imprisonment? Joy, joy. As Christians, we have this habit of reading Isaiah as some kind of theological Where's Waldo, seeing if we can spot Jesus in every turn of phrase. And on this page, there's just Waldo standing there in his stripy hat, all by himself, because Jesus quotes it in the start of his ministry in Luke. But by saying that Isaiah is just pointing at Jesus, it takes away some of the power in the message from the prophet. When this message was written, the community was in an uproar. Everyone wanted life back to something better, something massively much better than what they had been living. Everyone wanted the new normal. And they were at a moment where such a thing was possible. God was inviting human beings to step up and say, I am God's agent in this world, on this project. That's shocking. And we fail to recognize the shock of it when we think that Isaiah was only talking about Jesus. Because that invitation from God is still there, waiting for us to recognize it in our lives today. The essential workers in our world were always there, in the ER, in the classroom, in the grocery store. They worked at the transfer station and the nursing home, and to get the power lines back up when the tree limbs came down. But we didn't really see them. And I doubt we really saw them as essential. But they were then and they are now, and we're all much clearer about that now. So if this wretched virus has brought home to us that we're part of the oppressed and brokenhearted, captive and imprisoned, then Isaiah has a message for us. We're part of God's team that's going to build the new normal. We have an opportunity to make sure that our essential workers are recognized for what they are, not just essential, but valued. We should think about the Jubilee year and figure out what financial obligations and constraints we can loosen. Inadequate health care, poor quality childcare, unpredictable policing, all have financial burdens that constrain us. Those are all things we can work on as a community, now, here, with each other. Because God invited us to. And we get to work and chat with God while we do it. Joy, joy.